I want to ask you one raw question before I speak. If you stopped steering your life and simply trusted God, truly, completely, without reserve, what would happen next? Would your fear release its grip? Would the doors you've been pounding on finally open? Would the broken places begin to stitch themselves up? That question is not rhetorical. It is the threshold of a new season. Imagine a heart so exhausted by trying that it stops strategizing and surrenders. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the weight you carried for years is lighter, not because you worked harder, but because you let go. This message is for the doubter, the struggler, the saint who has prayed but still plans. It is for the one who has believed in God in theory, but not in the messy reality of surrender. We will walk tonight into what happens when trust stops being a Sunday phrase and becomes real. Trusting God completely is not sentimental. It is a supernatural operating system. It rewires priorities, redefines risk, and reroutes destiny. When faith becomes practical, your prayers look less like wish lists and more like blueprints. But trusting fully often demands a loss of control, loss of prestige, loss of comfortable explanations. It demands walking off the map and listening for a voice louder than the crowd. I want you to feel the urgency of this moment. This is not a motivational pep talk. It's an invitation into an experimental obedience that changes outcomes. We'll unpack 6 realities, stages, that begin to happen when a life truly trusts God: the dismantling of fear, the recalibration of identity, doors opening by design, supernatural provision, accelerated favor, and divine alignment with purpose. If you are ready to quit the habit of half belief, lean, because what I'm about to reveal is promise and protocol. And the first truth will strip the mask off every counterfeit piece you've settled for. But before we step into that truth, let me tell you about the night I realized trust was no longer optional. Fear is not merely an emotion, it's an atmosphere. It is that silent architect that shapes your decisions, limits your prayers, and blinds you to what God has already declared possible. Every human heart, before it learns to trust completely, is first trained by fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of waiting too long. Fear teaches you to control everything so that nothing surprises you. But the tragedy is that control is the enemy of faith. The moment you begin to rely on your ability to manage outcomes, you push God to the background of your own story. When you finally decide to trust God completely, something begins to happen internally, not instantly, but deeply. Fear doesn't vanish in one emotional moment. It is dismantled piece by piece as revelation replaces imagination. You begin to see that fear is often the evidence of a wrong picture painted by unbelief. Trusting God shifts that picture. Suddenly, what used to terrify you becomes territory for faith. The same storm that used to paralyze you now becomes a platform for encounter. Because trust is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to obey God in spite of it. Many people pray for courage while still entertaining fear. But courage is not born in safety. It's born in surrender. You cannot experience the supernatural while still negotiating your obedience with anxiety. You must come to a point where you say, even if I do not understand, I still believe. It's in that moment that fear begins to lose its grip. Trust dismantles fear by changing the authority you submit to. When fear speaks, it magnifies uncertainty. When trust speaks, it magnifies God's character. The voice you agree with will shape the world you live in. Think about Peter stepping out of the boat. It wasn't logic that carried him, it was trust. The wind didn't stop. The waves didn't flatten. But when his focus shifted from the waves to the word, he defied everything that was supposed to drown him. That's how God trains us. He doesn't calm the storm immediately. He first calms the man within the storm. When you learn to trust God completely, you stop praying for smaller waves and start believing for stronger faith. Fear thrives in the unknown, but trust thrives in revelation. The moment you understand that the one leading you cannot fail, the unknown stops being a threat. It becomes a classroom. You start interpreting delay differently. You see closed doors not as rejection, but as redirection. Every unanswered prayer becomes evidence of divine protection. Fear wants you to believe that you are alone in a battle God already won. Trust opens your eyes to the unseen hand that has been guiding your steps even through confusion. The dismantling of fear is not a gentle process. God will sometimes allow situations that expose what you secretly depend on. He will remove certain supports so that your confidence can no longer rest on human assurances. He will strip away options until only His word remains. And when you finally reach that breaking point where you say, Lord, if you don't do it, it will not be done. That's when true trust is born. The old version of you that was addicted to control begins to die, and a new version, rooted, stable, unshakable, begins to emerge. This is why the dismantling of fear is not punishment, it's purification. God doesn't destroy you to humble you. He dismantles what was never meant to sustain you. Every layer of fear that falls off reveals another layer of faith rising. You begin to breathe differently, think differently, pray differently. You stop rushing ahead and you start resting, because trust is rest, not inactivity, but inner stability in the middle of uncertainty. And when that peace begins to take hold, something extraordinary happens. You start hearing God clearly again. The static of fear fades and His direction becomes unmistakable. That is when the second transformation begins. The moment God starts redefining who you really are. Because after fear is dismantled, identity must be rebuilt. But what if the version of you've always known was built on fear all along? What happens when trust exposes that your confidence was never really faith, just control in disguise? Let's find out in the next part, the recalibration of identity. When fear begins to fall apart, something beautiful and unsettling happens next. Your identity starts to shift. For most of us, identity has been a construction project managed by comparison, achievement, and approval. We have learned to introduce ourselves through what we do, not who we are. We have confused activity with value and recognition with significance. But when you finally start trusting God completely, He begins to strip away every title, label, and illusion that has kept you from seeing who you truly are in Him. This recalibration of identity is not cosmetic, it is foundational. God begins to reorder your inner architecture. You stop defining yourself by what happened to you, what you possess, or who validates you. You begin to see yourself through the lens of divine design rather than human opinion. Trusting God completely pulls you out of the performance-driven version of yourself that hustles for worth and leads you into the restful awareness that you are already chosen, already loved, already seen. The anxiety of needing to prove something starts to fade when you realize that you were never called to perform. You were called to become. Every major transformation in Scripture began with an identity reset. Abraham became Abraham. Jacob became Israel. Simon became Peter. Saul became Paul. Trust didn't just change their direction, it changed their definition. When God begins to trust you with destiny, He always starts by renaming you internally. It's not about changing your job or location. It's about changing how you see yourself. Because until your self-image aligns with His word, you will keep sabotaging divine opportunities with human insecurity. This recalibration exposes a painful truth. Many of us have built our sense of self around survival, not revelation. We've won strength as armor, competence as camouflage, and independence as identity. But when you trust God completely, He begins to dismantle even that. He says, you are not your results. You are not your trauma. You are not your last failure. It's a hard truth because identity feels safer when it's built on something visible. But trust moves you into the invisible, into that sacred space where who you are is defined by whose you are. That's why trusting God feels like disorientation at first. The metrics of success that once guided you stop making sense. The applause that used to validate you suddenly feels hollow. People who once fit start to fade from your circle. It's not rejection, it's refinement. God is reintroducing you to yourself. He's reminding you that your value was settled before your first victory and before your first mistake. You begin to realize that you are not on probation with God. You're not working to earn His favor. You're walking to express it. And something powerful happens when identity is recalibrated. Peace becomes your posture. You stop rushing to prove and you start resting to grow. You no longer measure yourself by outcomes, but by obedience. That's when divine confidence begins to emerge. Not arrogance, not self-promotion, but a quiet certainty that who God says you are is louder than what circumstances say you're not. You become unshaken not because life is easy, but because you know your name in the Spirit. When you live from that awareness, your behavior changes effortlessly. The same criticism that once wounded you now glances off your spirit. The same delay that once frustrated you now matures you. You no longer need to manipulate timing or people because your trust in God's process anchors your worth. And this new identity begins to magnetize divine opportunities. Because when heaven looks for vessels, it looks for those who know who they are. But this recalibration is not without tension. God will test your new identity through seasons where your worth is questioned, your efforts seem unseen, and your value feels invisible. Those moments are not punishment, they are proof that your trust is growing. Because if identity is secure, external validation loses its control. And once you reach that point when you can say, even if no one claps, I'll still obey. Heaven marks you as ready for divine partnership. Yet, just as identity settles, another lesson begins. You will soon discover that trust doesn't only change who you are, it changes how you walk through life. You begin to notice that some doors start opening, not because you forced them, but because they were always waiting for this version of you. The next stage of this journey reveals a profound mystery. Doors open by design, not by desperation. When identity aligns with divine truth, something begins to shift in the atmosphere around you. The frantic struggle that once defined your pursuit starts to quiet down, and doors that once resisted you begin to respond. It's not magic and it's not luck, it's design. When your trust is complete and your identity is recalibrated, your steps fall into rhythm with God's architecture for your destiny. You begin to realize that in God's kingdom, doors don't open because you knock the loudest. They open because you arrived at the appointed time. Desperation is noisy. It begs. It forces, it manipulates. But design is patient. It prepares. It trusts. The believer who walks in divine design no longer wastes energy chasing after every opportunity that glitters. You understand that every open door is not a God door, and every closed door is not a denial. There are seasons where heaven keeps a door shut, not because you're unqualified, but because your heart is still unready. And when you finally trust the pace of God, you stop crying over doors that close and start discerning the doors that were never meant for you. When your trust matures, desperation dies. You stop trying to manufacture breakthroughs and you start aligning with principles that attract them. Divine design operates on timing, and timing is one of God's greatest tests. Sometimes He allows delay to reveal whether your faith is in the door or in the doorkeeper. The moment you start trusting His plan more than your own timeline, grace begins to flow with ease. You realize that divine doors are not rewards for effort. They are invitations for stewardship. Joseph in prison is the perfect example. His gift was ready long before Pharaoh called, but the door remained shut until Egypt had a problem only he could solve. Divine design waited for alignment, his maturity, Pharaoh's need, and God's appointed moment. When all three converged, the door opened without negotiation. That's what happens when you trust God completely. Your preparation meets purpose, and your purpose meets opportunity. There's no manipulation, no campaigning, no anxiety, just divine sequence in motion. Trust transforms your posture in the waiting room of destiny. You no longer pound on doors with frustration. You walk with quiet assurance that what belongs to you cannot be taken, delayed, or replaced. You begin to recognize that some doors open automatically when you carry the right weight of character. The promotion, the partnership, the favor, they come not because you pushed, but because you grew. God doesn't promote pressure. He promotes alignment. And here's the mystery. When you walk in divine design, you stop looking for open doors. Open doors start looking for you. Opportunities begin to locate your obedience. Divine helpers begin to sense a pull toward your assignment. What used to take years begins to unfold with divine precision. It's as though heaven had been waiting for you to stop forcing outcomes so it could start releasing appointments. But make no mistake, design doesn't mean ease. It means order. God will test if you can trust him when the design seems delayed. There will be moments where the silence feels cruel, when you'll be tempted to knock harder, speak louder, and fight for attention. Yet, true trust keeps you still. You will know the difference between striving and positioning. You'll discern that when God opens a door, no man can shut it, and when he shuts one, no man can pry it open. In divine timing, even rejection becomes redirection. The job that turned you down, the relationship that fell out, the plan that collapsed, they all were doors closed by mercy, not punishment. Because God doesn't just open doors for convenience, he opens them for calling. And when that realization settles in your spirit, you begin to live from rest, not rush. But here's where it gets even more astonishing. Once the doors start opening by divine design, something else follows that defies logic, provision. Suddenly, what you need to walk through those doors begins to appear without striving. Resources, help, and favor seem to materialize from unseen places. It's as though heaven itself funds what it designed. And that's where the next truth unfolds. Supernatural provision replaces strained hustle. When doors begin to open by divine design, something profound happens next. God begins to supply in ways that defy your logic. The same hands that once strained to make ends meet suddenly find rest in divine rhythm. You begin to notice a shift. What you used to chase now begins to chase you. What once required sleepless nights, endless networking, and anxious planning now flows with a kind of grace that cannot be explained, only experienced. This is the realm where supernatural provision replaces strained hustle. Strained hustle is born out of fear. The fear of lack, the fear of being forgotten, the fear that if you stop moving, everything will collapse. It's that inner tension that drives you to overwork, even when your spirit is weary. But when you truly trust God, you begin to see that provision was never meant to be earned through worry. It was meant to be received through obedience. There is a difference between working hard and striving from fear. God blesses diligence, but he does not endorse anxiety. True provision flows not from exhaustion, but from alignment. In the wilderness, Israel learned this lesson the hard way. God sent manna from heaven, enough for each day. They were not to hoard it, not to strategize how to store it, but simply to trust that tomorrow it would fall again. That was God's way of teaching them that supernatural supply always follows surrendered trust. Many of us are still collecting manna in panic, storing, scheming, and stretching to control outcomes, while God is calling us to step into a rhythm where our faith becomes the currency that unlocks supply. Supernatural provision doesn't always mean money. It could be wisdom that arrives just in time to make a right decision. It could be favor that opens access to someone you could never reach on your own. It could be divine ideas that transform your season in a single conversation. Sometimes provision appears as a person, sometimes as an idea, sometimes as a door. But every time, it carries the unmistakable signature of God. It arrives precisely when your strength has reached its limit. The moment you trust God completely with your resources, your time, and your outcomes, He begins to multiply what you have left. Remember the widow with the little oil. She thought her supply was too small to matter until obedience turned her lack into overflow. That's how divine economics work. God does not need much to do much. He only needs surrender. You see, supernatural provision doesn't respond to the size of your wallet. It responds to the size of your trust. When you trust God, your giving becomes joyful, not fearful. You stop saying, if I give, I'll have less, and start saying, if I obey, I'll see more. Because the hand that gives is the hand God fills. Trust transforms how you handle resources. You begin to live as a steward, not an owner. You realize that you are a channel, not a container. And when you position yourself as a vessel, heaven finds it easy to flow through you. That is why some people seem to attract consistent provision. They have mastered the art of releasing, not hoarding. But here's the truth. Before God entrusts you with abundance, He first teaches you dependence. He takes you through seasons where your salary doesn't stretch, your business feels slow, and your efforts seem unrewarded, not to punish you, but to detox you from the illusion that you are your own provider. Those moments are not evidence of absence. They are invitations to trust. God wants you to know Him, not just as Savior, but as sustainer. And when you finally learn this rhythm, provision starts arriving before you even ask. The phone call comes. The opportunity finds you. The helper appears without explanation. That's when you realize grace was always better than grind. God was never asking you to produce outcomes, only to position your heart. But here's the secret very few talk about. Once provision flows supernaturally, something else begins to accelerate. Things that should have taken years begin to unfold in months. Favor starts compressing time. God begins to redeem lost seasons and multiply results with divine speed. It's a dimension where effort meets acceleration. That's the next revelation waiting to unfold. Accelerated favor and untimed breakthroughs. When you begin to walk in supernatural provision, something remarkable starts to happen. The pace of your life shifts. You notice that things which once took years begin to align in months, and what others struggle for begins to come with unusual ease. It's not because you have become more intelligent or better connected, but because trust has ushered you into a realm called divine acceleration. This is where favor compresses time, and God begins to make up for seasons you thought were lost. It is the mystery of untimed breakthroughs. Those moments where heaven overrides natural timelines to fulfill divine purposes. When trust matures, God starts accelerating your destiny, not as a reward for effort, but as a response to surrender. You see, favor is not random. It is the visible evidence of God's invisible endorsement. When you are in right standing with His purpose, doors, people, and opportunities begin to synchronize in supernatural harmony. Suddenly, things that seemed delayed for years start moving with divine speed. A single encounter, a single idea, a single yes can shift what a decade of struggle could not. That is the beauty of accelerated favor. It redeems time without exhausting strength. In Scripture, Joseph embodies this mystery. One day, he was a forgotten prisoner. The next, he was standing before Pharaoh interpreting dreams. No campaign, no promotion ladder, no explanation. Just a moment of divine timing that rewrote his story. That's how favor works. It locates you where logic cannot find you. It doesn't always announce itself. It simply positions you at the intersection of destiny and readiness. But notice, Joseph's years in prison were not wasted. They were preparation for acceleration. Trusting God does not remove waiting, it redeems it. Every delay you survive becomes currency in the realm of favor. When God accelerates you, it's never to impress men, it's to fulfill assignments. The same people who overlooked you begin to seek you. The same system that ignored you begins to invite you. Suddenly, you are standing in rooms you never applied to enter, carrying influence you didn't fight to earn. That's not coincidence, that's divine endorsement. Favor is not fair, but it is intentional. It flows in the direction of those whose hearts are aligned with obedience. Untimed breakthroughs happen when heaven fast tracks outcomes that should have taken years. You begin to see divine convergence. Moments where everything seems to click at once. The right person calls at the right time. The opportunity arises just when you needed it. Resources appear out of nowhere. You realize that what you once chased is now being delivered to your doorstep by grace. It's as if God Himself is saying, "You've waited long enough. Now watch me accelerate." But acceleration is not chaos. God will never move you faster than your character can sustain. That's why trust and obedience remain critical. You must remain grounded while God elevates you, because favor that outruns preparation becomes a burden, not a blessing. Divine speed is safest in the hands of a surrendered heart. That's why God takes years to prepare you for blessings that will manifest in moments. And yet, even as favor accelerates your destiny, God will ensure one thing remains clear: you are not the source of your success. He will orchestrate circumstances that remind you that every open door, every unexpected connection, every multiplied result is a product of His mercy, not your mastery. The moment pride begins to whisper, grace begins to retreat. Sustained acceleration requires sustained humility. The beauty of trusting God completely is that He doesn't just bless you with outcomes, He blesses you with timing. He redeems years of frustration with one season of favor that feels like prophecy fulfilled. And when you experience it, you'll know no human hand could have done this. That's what divine acceleration feels like. Rest inside motion, peace inside progress, ease inside expansion. But as God accelerates your journey, something deeper begins to happen. Your steps are no longer random, they become orchestrated. You start to notice that every encounter, every delay, every open door has been leading you somewhere specific. This is not just favor, it's alignment. Because after acceleration comes the final stage of complete trust, divine alignment with purpose. Acceleration without alignment can become distraction. And this is why when favor begins to move swiftly and doors open effortlessly, God does something deeper. He starts to align your life with your purpose. Divine alignment is that sacred moment when every scattered piece of your story suddenly begins to make sense. The pain, the waiting, the unanswered prayers, the detours, all of it starts forming a pattern you couldn't see before. It is the season where God takes everything that once looked random and weaves it into revelation. You realize that you were never wondering, you were being positioned. Trusting God completely will always lead you into alignment. Because the more you surrender, the clearer His direction becomes. Purpose is not discovered in chaos, it is revealed in order. God begins to synchronize your desires with His will, your timing with His plan, and your ambitions with His assignment. The restless pursuit of what you thought you wanted gives way to the peace of walking in what you were created for. You stop asking, "Lord, what should I do?" and start declaring, "Lord, thank you for showing me who I am." That is the language of alignment. When your life stops fighting divine flow and begins to harmonize with heaven's rhythm. In alignment, everything starts to fit. You begin to see why certain people left and why certain seasons ended. What once looked like rejection now feels like redirection. The same doors that once confused you now reveal their purpose. Some were meant to protect you, others to prepare you. You start noticing divine patterns, that the job that didn't work out pushed you into calling, that the friendship that ended freed you for focus, that the heartbreak that broke you actually birthed discernment. When trust becomes your foundation, alignment becomes your reward. But alignment is not just about clarity, it's about capacity. When your life aligns with purpose, your capacity to carry divine responsibility expands. You stop doing good things and start doing God things. There's a precision in your decisions. You begin to say no with confidence because you finally know what yes truly means. God starts surrounding you with the right people, not those who entertain you, but those who sharpen you. The distractions lose their pull because your spirit recognizes its assignment. Alignment doesn't remove battles, it gives them meaning. Suddenly, you can endure storms you once ran from because now you understand their purpose. Pain becomes your tutor, not your tormentor. Waiting becomes training, not punishment. Every challenge becomes a tool in God's hand, shaping your maturity. You start realizing that purpose was never about spotlight. It was about stewardship. You were never called to be seen. You were called to be effective. When divine alignment takes hold, peace becomes your compass. Even when the next step isn't clear, you sense you're exactly where you're meant to be. You stop forcing progress because grace starts carrying you. You begin to live from conviction instead of convenience. You notice that your words carry weight, your prayers carry authority, and your presence carries impact. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because your spirit is synchronized with heaven's design. This is the beauty of complete trust. It doesn't just change what you have, it changes who you are becoming. You are no longer a wanderer hoping for direction. You become a vessel expressing divine intention. The storms you once feared now serve your destiny. The battles you once cursed now build your boldness. You begin to walk as someone who knows they are sent, not someone who is searching. But alignment is also a test. God will check if you can stay faithful when alignment leads to unfamiliar assignments. Sometimes He will shift you into places that don't look comfortable, but are critical for your calling. You will be tempted to go back to what's predictable, but alignment demands movement. Because the next stage after alignment is activation. When everything God has been building in you begins to manifest through you. And that's where the story turns. Because once you are aligned, heaven begins to express itself through your life. Your words start unlocking others. Your obedience becomes someone else's breakthrough. It's no longer just about trusting God for your journey. It's about becoming the vessel God trusts for His. And that's where the next revelation unfolds. When alignment turns into divine activation, would you be ready when God decides it's your season to be sent? So now you've seen it. The journey of complete trust is not a theory, it is a transformation. It begins in fear. It moves through surrender. It unfolds in identity. And it manifests in alignment. Every step strips away the illusion that you were ever in control and reveals the truth that God was always writing something bigger than your plans. The moment you truly trust Him completely, life stops being a cycle of guessing and starts becoming a story of grace unfolding. You realize that what looked like delay was development, what felt like rejection was redirection, and what seemed like silence was strategy. The wilderness wasn't meant to break you. It was meant to build you. The storms weren't sent to destroy your faith. They were designed to expose it, refine it, and make it unshakable. Because trust isn't proven in peaceful moments, it's proven when everything around you shakes, yet you remain still inside. When you finally trust God completely, fear bows, striving ends, and peace becomes your new strength. Doors open by design, not manipulation. Provision flows without panic. Favor accelerates without explanation. And alignment pulls you into the very purpose you were born to fulfill. You start realizing that every prayer, every tear, every waiting season had an assignment to make you trust the one who never fails. This is the real secret. God was never trying to make your life easier. He was trying to make your faith stronger. Because a strong faith can carry a heavy destiny. You stop living for control and start living for calling. You don't just believe in God, you believe with God. And suddenly, the phrase, trust completely, is no longer a challenge, it's a lifestyle. And in that moment of surrender, everything clicks. You see it clearly now. He was never late, never silent, never absent. He was preparing you all along. So if you've been wondering what happens when you finally trust God completely, this is it. Peace replaces panic. Grace replaces grind. And purpose finally replaces confusion. But even now, as you exhale in the relief of that revelation, heaven leans in with one more question. Now that you trust Him, will you dare to obey Him completely?